Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Russian missile and drone strikes across the country have killed at least 8 people. Russia says the large-scale overnight attack targeted military and defense industrial sites. The bombardment caused severe fires in several cities. 6 people, including 2 children, were killed in the Kryvyi Rih region when a missile struck their home. Ukraine says homes and civilian facilities were also damaged in Kyiv, Lviv, Kharkiv and Sumy. Yulia Shapovalova is standing by for us in Moscow, but let's start with Audrey MacAlpine. She's joining us from the Ukrainian capital. So Moscow saying it was targeting military sites. So what are we seeing was actually hit on the ground there, Audrey?
Well, here in the capital, it appears it was a lot of things like warehouses, infrastructure. But you mentioned that attack earlier where most of these casualties took place in a village outside of the southern city of Kryvyi Rih, where 2 children, a 2- and 5-year-old, as well as 4 adults were killed. Now, a lot of the damage we're seeing is things like apartments that may have had falling debris, but in this case, it was a direct hit from an Iskander missile on this house. Of course, Ukraine doesn't disclose all of the details surrounding some of the things that have been targeted, but we can't ignore the fact, a statement from the UN High Commissioner saying that July of this year was the most deadly for civilians in Ukraine since the first year of the war, since April of 2022. And we look towards earlier in July where huge casualty numbers in single events, over 30 people killed, for example, in early July in one attack on Kyiv, which is why you're seeing images from last night of subways around the capital overflowing with people, many anticipating this attack after a statement released by President Zelenskyy warning that something like this may take place. So in this particular instance, a lot of the details still coming out, whether they were military targets, but the result, Sammy, being that civilians no doubt still killed in the crossfire.
Okay, stay with us, Audrey. Let's go over to Yulia Shapovalova in Moscow. So what is the Russian line and what they were targeting?
Well, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, it was targeting military industrial infrastructure almost in all the regions of Ukraine. 2 drone production facilities were hit in Kyiv during their overnight strikes. An assembly plant for artillery and small arms industry called the Mayak plant, producing components and ammunition, as well as launch accelerators to strike drones, as well as the electrotechnical plant producing reconnaissance and strike UAVs of medium range. At the same time, the Russian Ministry of Defense never ever acknowledges that in its reports any attacks on civilian infrastructure and never mentions any civilian casualties.
Let's go back to Audrey. Ukrainians have been doing some shooting of their own, haven't they, Audrey? Tell us what you're hearing about an attack on a civilian company, a logistical operator in Russia.
Ukraine has been increasingly targeting the wild berries factories, which are essentially a major online retailer in Russia, the equivalent to Amazon, just recently hitting yet another one of those warehouses. It's part of Ukraine's long-range drone campaign that it's really been ramping up since around April of this year, using its domestically produced long-range drones, which can reach up to around 1,000 miles inside of Russia. Now, Ukraine claims it's doing this in order to push Russia back to the negotiating table. We are getting reports from local media here that since President Zelensky's visit to the U.S. earlier this week, that he is now working with U.S. officials there to try to draft a ceasefire in the sky with Russia. The hopes being that by striking Russia, by striking things like the Wild Berries warehouse, that eventually this could push Russia to halt its attacks into Ukraine like we saw last night.
Okay, and back to Yulia. What are authorities there saying about the damage from those Ukrainian strikes?
well, we heard from Russian officials that damage to companies working with online retailers who use such online platforms for selling their goods has turned out to be quite significant after all those drone attacks on Wildberries, warehouses, etc. And talking about the latest events, according to the Ministry of Defense, their air defense forces intercepted and destroyed 258 Ukrainian drones over Russian regions overnight. The drones attacked a Wildberries warehouse in the Penza region. And at the moment, we know that one person reportedly was injured there. About 200 employees were evacuated. And also a Wildberries logistics facility in the city of Sarapul in Udmurtia in central Russia as well. It was attacked and caught fire. Preliminary reports say there were no casualties, but the company stated that the evacuation had been carried out in advance. So as we know, as Audrey just said, logistics facilities of Wildberries, Russia's biggest online retailer, have been constantly attacked by Ukrainian drones lately. These strikes have been carried out in many regions of the country, bordering Ukraine's long-range drone strategy to force Russia to negotiations. So it's relatively new Ukrainian strategy apart from its strikes on Russia's oil production infrastructure. Obviously, Ukraine says that Wildberries sells drone components, but obviously the hardest hit are ordinary traders who use this platform, and of course discontent with this war is growing with them as well.
All right, let's thank both our correspondents, Yulia Shapovalova in Moscow and Audrey MacAlpine in Kyiv.